Hi, and welcome to The State of Work, the podcast by Lano. I'm your host, Sandra, and as a freelancer myself who's working with clients all over the globe, I am experiencing the shift of work every day. So I'm super excited to explore the current and future state of work with you in this podcast. We will talk about the benefits, limitations, and solutions around remote and flexible work and explore many different ways to collaborate and work together. For this, I am chatting with business leaders, innovators, freelancers, and remote employees to learn firsthand how they manage their day-to-day life in an ever-changing and ever-evolving world. In this episode, we have 17 years of HR and recruiting experience coming right at you in the form of Adam Bolton, Director of Talent at Currencycloud. Adam joins from his lovely home office in Ireland to talk all things recruiting, from first building a team around him at Currencycloud to switching their interview process during COVID, and finally following a direct hiring approach in their talent strategy today. He also shares how important knowing the culture of a company is for a successful hiring process, and shares some funny anecdotes about interviews gone wrong, including his own unfortunate experience with a pinstriped suit and a bubblegum on a train. Listen on to learn the whole story. Thanks so much for taking the time to joining us today, Adam. I see a lovely couple of pictures behind you. I'm assuming you're working from home today?
I am, yeah, indeed. Although these pictures are a little bit outdated. They look like babies, but my eldest is 21 and my youngest is 15. So they're very outdated photos.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe a couple of new ones about to be hanging up there in the future. So where exactly is it that your home office is located?
So I'm actually based in Ireland. I'm from Essex. I'm from Essex in England, but I've been living in Ireland for about the last 5 years-ish, or working from Ireland in the last 5 years. Even more so since the pandemic. Like, I used to travel back and forward a lot, but since the pandemic, it's pretty much been working here.
Yeah, that kind of plays right into what we were here to talk about today, which is the hiring process and the direct hiring process that your employer, Currencycloud, has chosen to do. So just to set the scene a little bit, as I understand it, Currencycloud is a big company, 450 employees. I think that's the last kind of number I've heard.
Yeah, no, it's actually more than that. We're 530 now.
There you go. That number has climbed since we researched that. And you've been acquired by Visa by the end of last year. So obviously a big company in the background of all of this. And you're in charge of the hiring process for your company. So obviously that poses the question, how do you approach hiring that many people for such a big company? What is your strategy for your everyday job?
So I'm director of talent here at Currencycloud, and that means that I'm responsible for our global hiring. So I looked at some numbers earlier on actually, and I think we've done almost 500 hires in the last couple of years. So there's a bit of attrition in there, lots of new heads. I think it's about 450, something like that. So in terms of like what we do or how we go about it, so I built the talent function here at Currencycloud from scratch. So I was the first recruiter who came in. There was somebody here doing a sort of talent role, but it was more on like the inbound applications. So I came in and sort of pretty much set up the talent function in terms of like outbound talent attraction. So we built it based around sort of in recruitment agency terms, you call them vertical markets, which is like having a very specialized niche area.
Yeah.
Internally, I call them pillars. So we've got people that specialize in various areas. And because of the volumes of hires that we've had to do and the specialized areas we've had to do, we've kind of built the team up with various pillars. So we have like a tech and product recruitment team, sales, compliance and operations. So it's kind of built as like a well-oiled machine that services the needs of Currencycloud.
You've said before that you've been with Currencycloud for a while and you've set that whole team basically up from the get-go. Mm-hmm. How has that changed? How has your approach to that changed? If it has changed, I'm assuming the last 2 years have done something to your hiring process. Give us an insight about your journey in that position.
I suppose the main difference, or the main thing that's changed, is obviously that everything's now remote. So when I first joined, whenever you would be interviewing someone it would be in person. Like you might do a few phone screens with people, but there would be like an in-person sort of thing. So we Currencycloud, we made the decision very early on in the pandemic that we would be remote first, and we would never go back to being an office-based company. So what we have done is like we still only interview remotely. Like there's no coming into the office to meet people. We're quite geographically dispersed, particularly around the UK. So the main challenge has been taking that from like your in-person interviews to doing things online. I think it was an easy transition for us in terms of the what do you call it, the configuration, in terms of like, because we use Google Hangouts, right? So and everyone actually used to work 1 day a week from home, so we were very well set up in that respect. From a candidate perspective, though, people weren't always used to doing interviews online. So what we did was we built out like some candidate packs. So we sent people like basically like how to interview online. And we kind of step by step, with screenshots and introductions and how to get online and that kind of thing. So I think that's been that was the main challenge in terms of over the last few years, like how we've grown and how the team has grown. There's not been any major differences in terms of like how we build it. So as I mentioned, like the pillars, building these pillars. But what we did have to do was there was a lot of growth in North America and Singapore for our APAC expansion. So what we did was I hired people in those two geographic areas, but there wasn't enough hires to have full-time recruiters. So what we did was I hired people in that had like a sort of dual hybrid HR and recruitment background. So they kind of run the whole like people focus or people function in those areas because it would be too expensive to do all those hires through recruitment agencies, but there wasn't enough that someone would just focus on talent.
That's a perfect segue over to the main topic of our conversation today, which is the kind of spicy headline of direct hiring versus using an agency, a talent agency. And you've just answered that question just before, saying that you were doing it in-house. You were using a little bit of a hybrid model for an in-between period of time, but you've chosen to do it in-house and to do direct hiring. What's the reasoning for that?
I think... Yeah, so we've got this target, right? And I think all companies will say they've got a target of 100% direct hiring. If they say they've done it, they're lying because it's impossible. But we want to get as close as possible to 100%, right? And kind of the reasoning for that was I joined originally. So my background is tech. I'm a tech recruiter. I've done it for many, many years, since like 2005. And I came in because we had a big ramp up in tech hires that we needed in software engineering. So I came on to help that. And when we saw the value of the internal model, it was just a no-brainer. Like we replicated it out into other parts of the business, and we've been able to drive down the cost. So for me, there's two things on direct hiring, right? Number one is there is a massive cost saving, right? So I looked at my numbers earlier. 2021, we saved on the bottom line. So after paying the recruiters' salaries and all that kind of thing, all the tools we use, we saved 1.7 million. And this year so far, we've actually saved 1.75 million already on like the bottom line number. But what you also get is you have a team of people who work here, right? You know what life is like at Currencycloud when you're talking to candidates. You know the business, you know how things operate, you know the hiring managers, you know the sort of people that succeed at Currencycloud. And as a result, it leads to better hires. Last year, for example, in terms of like probationary periods, I think we had like out of nearly 250 hires we made last year, and we had like 3 people had their probation extended. So like pretty much everyone would be like passing their probation. So I just feel that it gives because you know what you're looking for in the business and you know what succeeds. When you're agency side, you don't. you can, after a number of years working with a client, understand their business, but you don't live it, you don't breathe it, you don't go and sit in the office. Well, during the pandemic, we couldn't go and sit in the office, but like nowadays, you can't go and sit with those colleagues and work together. So I think it makes a big difference in the caliber of candidates that you hire, and that's something that's been echoed throughout the business. Like since we started doing this, which is about 2.5 years now, the caliber of candidate that comes through is strong, and it saves the manager's time as well, right? Because the recruitment team are filtering out the candidates. So it means that the hiring managers are spending less time doing interviews and more time making hires and getting on with their jobs.
Yeah. How do your recruiting managers then manage to build up a big enough talent pool to be able to bring in these better candidates that have this perfect fit for the company, because they can combine the knowledge of the culture with the company with the knowledge of the candidates? But for that, they need to know the candidates. So I'm just wondering, how can they make up for that big talent pool that recruitment agencies probably have?
Well, recruitment agencies do have a big talent pool, right? But you also have to remember that we live in times where the recruitment agencies don't have access to any other tools than we do. We have the same access to the same tools. In fact, we have more because we have like portals and platforms that are designed specifically for internal use. So direct companies approaching people directly who have their profiles set up with these things. So we actually have more options. We also live in times of GDPR, right? Particularly in Europe. In GDPR, we only hold on to candidates' data for as long as is necessary, and for us that's 6 months. And recruitment agencies will probably be about the same. So they might have access to perhaps a big talent pool, but for us, we have access to the same tools. But our talent pool doesn't need to be massively vast. Our talent pool needs to be specified on the roles that we hire for. So we only care with respect about the candidates that we're interested in, not the entire market. So because we have the teams and the setup in the teams, they do a lot of outbound direct sourcing. So they're still able to build a pipeline of candidates to come through into the business for the hires that we need to make. Occasionally, you do draw a blank and you do need to look to agencies for a little bit of assistance on certain positions. But generally, like we're at 9.5% agency usage this year so far. So we've got it like under 10%. So we're able to do something right there because the pipeline's being built well.
Yeah. What are your, if you are allowed or you want to share, what are your main channels or pathways to finding these candidates? What's your secret?
I don't actually think necessarily there's a big secret in recruitment personally, right? I think it's the best recruiters that I've ever worked with do the same thing time and time again, right? They have a formula and it works, and they just continue, they rinse and repeat that formula, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's about things like LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is like the number one tool for this sort of stuff, right? I've been using LinkedIn since about 2006 when it wasn't that. So it started out as like this business networking thing, and then they realized the power of it was in like jobs and stuff and recruiters and recruitment agencies. So I don't think there's necessarily a secret. It's just hard work, being switched on, and having that formula that you repeat, right? So for me, it's reaching out to candidates in a timely manner with relevant information that gets their interest, right? And you send like a couple of messages, see if you can try and get people on board. But it's one of my bosses used to say it's a numbers game. It is, right? It's making sure that you're approaching enough people. If you know that it takes you 25 reach outs to get one response and you need to hire 4 people, you need to do the math, right? And make sure that you come through with enough people. So yeah, we do use other platforms. There's good tech hiring platforms like HackerJob is one that we use. So we do use those platforms, but yeah, just having your process for me is what makes sense.
Yeah. How big of a role, in your opinion, plays knowing the culture of the company you're hiring for in the hiring process? Because I know you've mentioned it's super important to actually know what's going on and to actually know who you're hiring for, not just in terms of who the company is, but also how the company operates and which candidate would fit in. Will that make a massive difference, in your opinion, to a hiring agent that can't provide that insight?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that they can't, right? But there's an extra step in the
Mm.
process for the candidates, right? And we know there's a war on talent. It's a candidate-driven market. You're adding extra steps in because they won't know all those answers. When people jump, because my team screen every single candidate that comes through, so they don't get to the hiring managers unless we've screened them. So when we're doing that screening process, 99 times out of 100, we know the answers to the questions they're going to ask because we work here. Right? We know what our benefits look like. We know what an average day looks like. Like, it just and people can ask us like how you feel about Currencycloud, and we've got not massive amounts of longevity because I've only had the team in place for a couple of years, but they can see that people are sticking around, and you can talk about those things. You can talk about those sort of figures around people staying and things like that. So I think from an agency perspective, it just adds an extra layer, an extra step that they need to jump through.
Now, the big topic of global hiring. I know you said that you are hiring remote remote positions anyways, all throughout the UK. Is that still focused on UK or Europe though, or are you globally hiring now?
So we hire. We're FCA regulated, so we're a bit restricted on where we can. We can't just pull people from any country and just employ them because of the FCA regulations for us. But we hire people in the UK, the Netherlands, the US, and Singapore. So they're where we have entities that we operate, and we have multiple people in those locations.
And how do you manage to know your talent or to have your focus groups in these specific markets? Because I'm assuming that opening your hiring process up to hiring not just locally, but also in some sort internationally in these different markets means obviously you have to find the talent there, which is easy using the tools that you described. But there's also a different maybe cultural background that you kind of need to be aware of when you're hiring in certain other areas. How do you manage these specific challenges?
So for me, I think it's just important that we have people on the ground in those locations who are from those locations, or at least have lived in those locations for a few years. Because, like you say, there's certainly a lot of cultural differences. We've had like with Singapore as a perfect example. Like there's a lot of different cultural things that we wouldn't have been aware of previously, and it's having somebody there that kind of acts as a advisor around those things, that helps us to ensure that we are being as inclusive as possible when it comes to our hiring, when it comes to onboarding, pre-boarding. When we're bringing people on post onboarding, when they've started with the company, that what do we need to take into consideration for these different locations. And when you try to do it, before I joined Currencycloud, we opened the US office, and it was all managed from the UK. And as a result, a lot of like the US benefits, for example, were quite UK centric because we'd kind of set them up just with how we would do things.
Yeah.
And then when we hired someone in the US, they were like, "Yeah, we don't really do that." We had to sort of adjust quite a lot of things. So I think it's super important to have people on the ground. I think if you don't have enough work for somebody to do full time, that I would 100% use like local recruiting, local staffing agencies in those instances because they understand the local market.
Well, I can't not ask this because you seem to have or you mentioned in the introduction that we did that you have 17 years of experience in the hiring HR world. Do you have any funny, weird stories from your interview processes? Anything that you probably shouldn't say, but I kind of want you to say?
God, I wish you'd sent me an email first and made me think about it. Put me on the spot. I remember a few years. I'm actually going back a lot of years now. When I was working in an agency, we had a guy go for interview, and they rang me afterwards and said, we're not going to proceed with this guy because he turned up to the interview in shorts and a t-shirt, which is probably more acceptable now, right? We could do it in Currencycloud and no one would care because we have a casual dress
Yeah.
policy. He turned up in shorts and a t-shirt, and when the interviewer asked him to come in, he said he was playing on his Game Boy, and he said, "I just need to finish this level. I'll be in a minute." It's like, yeah, I remember I actually had one. I wrote a blog article actually thinking about it now. If I could try and find it, there's like 5 interview mishaps or something.
Oh yeah, we have to link that in our show notes
Yeah,
for
I think
sure.
there was one, and there's one about me in there as well. So when I was much younger than I am now, and I was going interviewing for my first jobs in recruitment, I managed to sit on bubblegum on the train, and I was wearing like a pinstripe suit, and I ended up because I couldn't get the chewing gum off. I ended up going to a shop and buying a pen and drawing the line through the chewing gum so that you couldn't notice it was there.
Oh, I hope you have a photo of that somewhere. That would be awesome.
I don't have a photo, but it definitely happened.
We have to make sure to link that article so people can
Yeah,
read up on these
it's-
other mishaps.
Yeah, I used to do like guest articles for the Undercover Recruiter, and
Yeah.
it's definitely still exists there somewhere because I occasionally I'll get like a bit of traffic coming through to like my Twitter and things like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, with all of that experience that you can look back onto, there's also a lot of future still ahead of us. Exciting things are happening for Currencycloud, and exciting things are happening in the world of work. We've especially seen that over the last 2 years. So, in your opinion, what is next? What are the new next challenges that the HR world or the recruiting world will face, and what is next for Currencycloud in particular?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this recently. I think there'll be more automation as the AI tools get smarter. I think for bulk hiring, the AI tools can do a job at the moment, right? Because you can have multiple sort of questions and it will filter out the people that just aren't relevant. So I think for bulk hiring that works. For pretty much all of our roles are specialist roles. So for the specialist positions, it's that AI, it's not quite there yet. I think it will get there. I think that it will play a much bigger part in our daily lives in terms of recruitment. And I think that we'll also look at people staying in jobs for shorter periods of time. I think gone are the days when people dedicate their lives. Like my dad worked for Ford Motor Company, I think for 37 years. And all of his friends worked in their companies for so many years. Yeah. I think, nowadays, get 2 years out of someone, you've done quite well. So I think that will become more and more acceptable, particularly coming out of the pandemic where people are like, do you know what? I'm not going to sit doing something that makes me unhappy. Life's too short. I'm going to make sure I do something that keeps me happy. So I think that's a challenge for employers to keep their employees engaged, to keep the longevity, because when people leave, they take a lot of knowledge with them, and that you've spent a lot of time building that knowledge up. So I think that will be a challenge, and I think flexibility as well. I think a lot of companies will move away from the 9 to 5. I think there'll be a lot more flexibility in terms of when you work and where you work. I think I think the 9 to 5 is outdated. With my team, I say to them, when you're productive, work then. I don't mind. Like, don't burn the candle at both ends, but when you're most productive, that's when you feel free to work. I'm a morning person. I get up at 5:30 in the morning and go to the gym. I come home, I start working, and I'm very productive in the mornings and early afternoon. You can ask my wife in the evenings, I fall asleep watching TV at about 7, 8 o'clock. But some of my team are the opposite way round, and they're very productive in the evenings and find that that's a really good time to reach out to candidates because candidates aren't at work. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll see a bit of a shift in terms of working practices and working patterns as well. Those 3 are my next 10 years. I think that those things will come more prominent.
Well, sounds like it's going to stay interesting, and there's probably a lot more to talk about in the future with these new practices coming in. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It was an absolute pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your morning. As you said, it's morning for you right now, so enjoy your productivity and have a good rest of your day.
No worries. Well, thank you, Sandra. I appreciate you taking time to have a chat with me.
The State of Work is a podcast by Lano and is available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us at Instagram or Twitter by searching for The State of Work. For more information about today's topic and links to further reading, check out our show notes at lano.io/podcast. Thanks for listening, and until next time on The State of Work.